to plan and forecast after the lockdown ends. At a time, we did see what the major challenges to planning were, how companies were facing it in the previous two editions. We will see forward. This will be more of a forward-looking kind of an town hall where we'll be looking at how we will be able to go ahead with business as normal as possible. And a two-liner about the Institute of Supply Chain Management. We are a thought leadership institute focused on education, training, research, consulting in the area of supply chain management and demand planning. For those of you who have not been familiar with us, we also have a portal for supply chain management called Supply Chain scmpro-knowledge.in. We request you to kindly log on to SCM Pro Knowledge. You will find articles, interviews, opinions, blogs, a wide variety of interesting articles on demand planning, forecasting, and supply chain management as a whole. Having said that, I would like to introduce today's panel. We have with us a very eclectic panel. We have with us Abe Thomas, Associate Director, Integrated Business Planning at Kellogg Company. After a series of stellar roles in multiple MNCs, Abe today heads the Integrated Business Planning. We have Manoranjan, DGM Supply Chain, heading supply chain and operation for Mitsubishi Electric for the last 9 years, and an expert in handling diverse operational issues and complex business scenarios. Welcome, Manoranjan. We have with us Kumar Singh, Chief Analytics and Product Advisor at Jaga.ai, an experienced supply chain planning analytics professional with 12+ years of experience in end-to-end supply chain. In an advisory role as an interim Chief Product and Data Science Officer, he is helping the world's first focused IoT and AI-enabled warehouse processes. Welcome, Kumar.
My pleasure.
We have with us Ramandeep Singh, AGM Valvoline, a supply chain planning leader with extensive experience in SNOP, IBP, forecasting and demand management, advanced planning and scheduling, and supply chain strategy. Welcome, Ramandeep. And to moderate the session, I would introduce Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman, Institute of Supply Chain Management and Dean, the Demand Planning Academy, which incidentally is a center of excellence of demand planning under the Institute of Supply Chain Management. Dr. Singh is an educationist, a thinker, an author, and a celebrated speaker in fora. Dr. Singh, I request you to take on the and conduct this session going forward. Thank you very much, Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Girish, and thank you all the panelists. As we are into a series of town halls, this town hall essentially will look at how firms have been planning during the lockdown and the COVID-19 period, and how do they intend to take their forecasting and planning process further amidst the uncertainty that emerges from this particular pandemic. Clearly, if you look at India, India is placed in the middle. And when I say India is placed in the middle, I mean that we already have seen a supply shock. And as the incidence of this pandemic started increasing in this country and spreading in its length and breadth, we saw a demand shock. And it really affected both supply and demand, and synchronizing supply and demand becomes very imperative for us to fight this uncertainty. Amidst this whole uncertainty, there has been a thought process which was looming large, that organizations need to move from the deterministic framework of understanding their business, their forecast, their bias, to more resilient framework as uncertainty increases. And in this pandemic, it seems have created more uncertain times in future too. It has also defined a kind of a next normal, if not a new normal in totality. I would call it, as I would agree with McKinsey, as a next normal. And it has forced organizations to react very differently during this last 2.5 months of lockdown. So without much wasting time, I'm taking the debate further, and let me invite Abe Thomas from Kellogg Company. And I'm looking at Abe because in India the essentials were allowed. In India, essentials played a very big role. In India, essentials, faced the first brunt of so-called, regulatory non-clarity, and still they served the country well. So from that perspective, Abe, how has the planning been done in the last, post March 24th? What has been the challenges in terms of planning? Do you think that planning is dead? A lot of people say that now the planning is totally dead, and the forecasting is dead. Rather, planning will remain, but forecasting is dead. And I have seen an enormous amount of literature in the world media and the global media and global blogs saying that, oh, forecasting is not going to remain the same. And I think that statement sounds much better than saying that it's dead. So can we have your views as the first town hall speaker?
Thank you, Dr. Singh. And before I share my views, I hope everyone's safe at home and is able to keep their spirits as high as we can all humanly be in this particular situation. On this particular episode, I think like everyone else, as the episode started, the shock and awe was very, very real, right? So we didn't know what to do exactly as things started. So I won't say that we were very clear about how to navigate this. Thankfully, I think the operating teams took up the challenge and found novel ways of managing it. I know that Saurabh spoken about this in an earlier webinar at the same forum, saying that we use a hyper-local approach. So we said the 30,000 view doesn't help; it needs to be as close to the ground as possible. And that is what we kept as our true north, saying that this is how we're going to move. So we'll pick a city at a time. Post that, it goes to the state, and then only it goes to the country. So it became a very, very localized approach, completely to the situation and responding to the situation that we saw on the ground. Specific to planning, we took a conscious call of putting a pause on the planning itself. So March 24th, when it happened, the March cycle was already on. We had an SNOP which was flouted, or we had a value and a volume outlook that we had already projected for April. We didn't go and tinker with it. We didn't change anything in it. We said let it be, because we will discover a lot of new things as days unfold. And I'm happy that we left it at that. We didn't try to intellectualize too much about it. We made things a bit simple for ourselves. I believe that once we have such pandemics and calamities, one of the things that happens is it gives you clarity of thought, because it takes away a lot of your comfort zones and it pushes you into new places, which forces you to be clear about what your priorities are. What we did was we said, given the current situation, we cannot service the entire portfolio. While my planning was for the entire portfolio for April, we restricted it to a select few. To be precise, we went with high 20s as our focus SKUs, and that was a common alignment between the planning team. We facilitated, but the commercial teams took onus of it. And that's where I think the collaboration started, saying that, okay, this is how we're going to navigate the initial phase of challenge. 1 month down the line, again, the collaboration happened across functions, led by supply chain, collaborated through finance as well as the commercial functions. And we extended it now to high 40s. So it's staggered. So there was no one way that we approached it. We keep calibrating it. And that's how we've been able to manage our demand, which is pretty strong and robust and has come back to a reasonably strong level given our pre-pandemic phases. I think that's how we've navigated our process. Consciously, like I said, we were planning on a pause. We didn't trigger it back again. But in May, as things started to come back to some semblance of normalcy, we went back and started looking at April and May with a very, very minute lens. So we don't look at volumes now on a week, which was traditionally how we used to approach. Today we're looking at volumes or how trends are looking on a daily basis. Again, I think a lot of people have talked about demand sensing, right, which is the complete near term. And we used to possibly look at near term just from an operational perspective or an operational lens. Maybe planning needs to go there and not stay at the near term. It needs to be very, very near term and short term. Sorry, not just a short term, and it needs to come down closer to the near term, because there are a lot of trends which are emerging, have not crystallized, but there are definitely trends which are emerging which could hold us in good state in the future. That's how we've managed it, Dr. Singh.
Abhay, could you let us know what has been this near-term and short-term focus? What factors actually led to this? Because see, it's very easy for you to say this, but for us to understand this is very important. That how the businesses actually rallied around in short-term and near-term. What were the factors that forced you to relook at this particular portfolio in May?
Okay. So what constraints were we faced with? First was supply side. So the demand side, yes, went into a shock to start with, where you had hoarding, and then the whole challenge came from the supply side, right? So we said, okay, let's decouple our forecasting from the short term or the near term, sorry, not short term. And we used a principle which is now being widely talked about, which is the theory of constraints and DDMRP, right? Now, I will say that this is part chance, part preparation, because we've been working on the concept of DDMRP now for close to 2 years, 18 months to be precise, right? We were in advanced stages of finalizing the principles, as well as close to getting the pilot out somewhere in March period. We fast-tracked that point of work and we deployed that in April itself. So our complete near term moved out of forecasting to demand-based replenishment, and thankfully we did not have to depend on either Excel sheets or human intelligence to be able to do it. We had an application available to us.
Did you find any changes in the consumer demand or consumer buying behavior during this period of time that led you to look at short term as really the fine-tuning method of planning?
Yes, we did. I don't think it was very clear during April. I think it became very, very clear in May, right? There are a few clear signs that are purely imaging. First and foremost, the geographies that where the pecking order used to say that state 1 versus state 2, that pecking order has changed slightly. Maybe not at the state, but in the cities definitely, right? The second one is between channels. So specifically speaking, modern trade, which used to be a reasonable contributor still, has taken some sort of beating towards April and May. Yeah, there is stress on modern trade specifically. What's picking up is definitely e-com, and when e-com picks up, it gives you much wider consumer availability. And as tier 1, tier 2 supplies through either Big Basket or either the players like Swiggy or Danzo pick up, where they will use a local aggregator model, I sense that that is going to change, and that will again reshape in the next level how cities are and how cities play up in terms of their own criticality. The third one is on portfolio, right? To start with, it was scarcity because we were not carrying the entire portfolio. But if you go back and look at how April and May have played, partly because of how and what we were supplying, but also because of consumer preferences, they have come back to the core food that they liked, right? The second one that I think is very important is the whole aspect of health and nutrition, which is playing out. So if you look not just for Kellogg, I think if you were to just look at across categories and brands, what is doing well is what people are trusting. So any brand which has had a novel trust value and has not diluted it over the course of years through actions has stood to gain in this time. Our philosophy of providing nutritional food consistently for so many years now has helped the consumer now put that trust in terms of what they're finally consuming. The third one that I think for categories which are small, especially like us, which are not very, very heavily penetrated, unlike a shampoo or a biscuit, this period is also habit forming. right? 60 days people have been at homes, they have tried brands, they have started trusting them, and then there is slight habit formation or the initial phase of habit formation which is going to take place now, which again will shape how the portfolios are going to behave and how new consumers are going to accept you and also demand in future. So in that sense,
All right.
this particular bit really helps.
Thank you, Abhay, for such a informative answer to the question. Let me now take you to Ramandeep. Ramandeep comes from Line, a lubricant company, and we thought we'll take B2B companies and B2C companies also in the process so that we get to understand the economy as a whole. So Ramanpreet, on the same question, how have you managed your demand planning in the last 1.5, say 50, 60 days? And how, how much are you forecasting? And in what is the format of forecast that you are adopting, Because I've seen that organizations have hyped up their forecasting to largely APOs. And APOs, now is that what is happening, or there's a lot of change that are happening in the forecasting frameworks and planning frameworks, even in company which essentially is into lubricant and not into essential, though it is essential. I cannot really justify it, but yes, let's hear from you, Ramandeep. Sorry.
Hi, Dr. Singh. Thank you for having me here. I must say that your webinars are very, very informative and it adds a lot of value for all the participants. Coming back to a very important question, I would say this pandemic has been a very hard time for all the planners and especially for demand planners, because most of the demand planners have been used to use a black box kind of approach, which obviously is not working in these times. And hence we are having a bigger problem for us. And if we give some perspective to the current situation, like in the month of January, February, when the pandemic started showing some face in China, the initial response to that was that this is more of a Chinese localized phenomenon, and how we need to address that is by ensuring that we have sufficient raw materials which we are sourcing from China. So that was a very, very localized problem which we thought it was. But as the pandemic went ahead, and it was more of a jaw dropping when an employee from one of my nearby office tested positive, and then we actually got to know what the gravity of the situation is. And we now know at least that the COVID-19 impacts will be far-reaching and very, very long-lasting. And whatever we have been doing, because we have never been prepared for these kind of exigencies. So no doubt, most of the companies are having some kind of business continuity plans in place, but no one was prepared to handle a situation which is impacting impacting all the regions across the globe, impacting demand side, impacting supply side. And in fact, for us, it was also impacting the sourcing side because the crude prices are falling every day. We were not we were not in a position to create excess inventory, because that will with all these lockdowns going on, that would mean that we are having a higher cost inventory with us, which once the market opens up, it will be difficult to liquidate. So again, the approach which we took was for the month of March till, I would say, Q3, we are stopping the traditional demand planning approach, which is obviously more of a time series approach, looking at how the historic order patterns have been. And this is in line with the kind of orders and the kind of response we're getting from the market. So we are basically into three segments. One is OEM, B2B, B2C. And what we've done is we've gone into more of a market sensing approach, which is we're trying to understand in case of India, what all OEMs are opening up, what OEMs, what regions, green zone, red zone, orange zone, what zone the OEM falls into, how they will ramp up their capacities, what kind of consumption pattern will evolve from them. Similarly, on the B2B and B2C, I would say was the worst impacted because of a complete lockdown, and then there was not much movement of passenger cars or of two-wheelers, which impacted the demand. But again, in our case, unlike what Abhay mentioned, we are not anticipating any major product mix change, because for us, we are into a business where our oil goes as per OEM recommendation. So the consumer really does not have an option to choose from A, B, or C. If A is recommended, he has to consume A. So from that perspective, we're not seeing any product mix change, but what we are seeing is this overall downturn of the demand what we are having, and people are destocking. So the channel is restocking considering the uncertain situation we are into. So as of now, we're not using any statistical model, and instead we are focusing more on the demand sensing, the signals we are getting from the market, what markets are open, what kind of insights we're getting from our exports markets. Like we are already seeing a recovery lessons we can learn from China, from Vietnam, from South Korea. The observation from them is that once the lockdowns are over, we are suddenly seeing a V-shaped recovery happening. And because the clientele is the same, we are seeing the same portfolio is delivering the results for us. So for short, so we are dividing our horizon into 3 buckets: short term, medium term, and long term. Long term, again, I think time series would still make sense. But again, I would say we need to focus more on the predictive analytics rather than descriptive analytics, and be in sync with what is actually happening on the ground. So our short term and medium term is largely focusing on demand sensing, the signals we are getting from our sales team, from our channel, what kind of consumption patterns we are getting from the channel. So those are the things what we are doing in the short and medium term, Mr. Singh.
All right, that's a good focus. Looking at little bit of scenarios, little bit of what's happening in the market in the short and the near term, and responding. So I think there's not much of a difference between Kellogg's approach and your approach in the larger sense of planning. Let me take you to Manoranjan Nayak. And Manoranjan, on the same question, what is your business continuity plan after this disruption?
Good afternoon, Mr. Singh. In fact, till yesterday, we are having discussions over business continuity plan as how to move forward for FY20 and 21 and 22. So there are a lot of things which are absolutely cannot be foreseen at this point of time. So since Mitsubishi Electric is predominantly into infrastructure and industry solutions, so we are largely not affected except the sections which is more of having a consumer-centric product portfolios. So, for example, the infrastructure projects or so which has already been driven by the state and centered sponsored models. So that is not affected. The only thing is that we are being impacted by 1 to 3 months of postponement of the orders. And so when it comes to the business like semiconductors or power sector, still it is having a horizon of 6 months to 1.5 years or 2 years. So the section which is impacted is more of factory automation or manufacturing section or OEMs, wherein the impact that we are seeing, we are not being able to have a clear visibility that how exactly we should move forward. So that is one section, and also the B2C product like air conditioners, that is also being impacted, wherein the as the gentleman said, that demand sensing also need to be done in the various nearest point. So which is actually becoming very difficult how to move to the closest point. So in couple of cases, we have started building inventories across. So now from Q2 onwards, we are trying to bring it down exactly the way on a short term and on a medium term prospective basis. So that is what the plan is for FY20 and FY21.
All right, thank you, Manoranjan. Kumar, you come from a technology framework with machine learning, AI, IoT. What has been your observation in terms of how firms have actually managed forecast, managed their supply chain, and how would ML and AI provide that particular solution to the problem in the immediate long run?
Just want to
Before
make
that,
sure
you
you.
can also,
Sorry, go ahead.
even after, before that, you can also look at maybe what do you think would be the prominent drivers of forecasting in the near future, given the kind of uncertainty that has prevailed in the market across globe. When non-96 countries are under pandemic, the whole concern is that how do you really understand the dynamics of incremental change in demand and supply, and then sustaining this demand and supply over long period of time.
Sure. So let me address this question, this question first, before I get to the couple of questions that you asked earlier. So I think the approach, one of the approach that companies are basically adapting, and that should be the ideal approach, I think, in the short term, as we get out of the pandemic, is very similar to what Abe was mentioning that his company has been taking, is to focus on the short term. To be very realistic, advanced analytic approaches like leveraging machine learning or any other advanced analytic approaches, they take time and careful planning. And I really don't think we are in a situation right now where companies have the resource and energy to focus on that. So I think for now, a good approach, and an approach that based on my understanding, many companies are taking, is to keep leveraging the planning team or the planning processes that they have currently, but restructure it. So one aspect, like Abhay was mentioning, is something that's prevalent in many companies, as in they have turned their focus from mid to long-term forecasting and planning to short-term. And that short-term time period has actually, for some companies, it's actually even 2 to 8 weeks. And what that allows you to do is basically get more granular and more realistic, because with this pandemic, it's really difficult to put a handle on what exactly the demand would be even 6 weeks from now, right? So this short-term 2 to 8 weeks of approach is actually allowing companies to make more granular plans. Another thing that I know some of the CPG companies here in US are doing is getting more fragmented in terms of focusing and forecasting at very detailed geo levels, as in the forecast which used to be aggregated at, say, regions, for example, northeastern US, has been further broken down, because as you can imagine, as the markets come out of this pandemic, each region may behave differently. So to get a better handle on what the demand may look like, it makes more sense for these companies to go more granular in the geographic aspect as well. So I think, to summarize it, a good approach as we get out of this pandemic is, unfortunately, to get more granular rather than more automated, more manual rather than get more automated at this point, which unfortunately is a better approach, at least at this point, so that you can actually get leverage some of the tribal knowledge that people in planning have accumulated over years, and you can manually input parameters that generally do not exist in a standard forecasting process, like this unprecedented event and the huge demand spike of some items because of this event. So that, I think, is the short-term approach, and is an approach that I've seen companies taking. Now, if I go back to your question on how ML can help,
I'll come back to you on that. That was a very early question. I think let's look at this from the perspective of forecasting techniques and some insight framework that is available from MLAI. I think there's one consensus among everybody here, is that forecasting and demand planning has to be very local, as Abe said, hyper local, has to be granular, and also depends upon the whole nature of the business, supply chain framework and end-to-end supply chain issues, because as Raman or as Manoranjan really talked about supply shocks, they also determine, or factory availability of labor also determine what you can actually supply. And the nature of the pandemic in terms of incidence of the disease and the spread of disease in terms of red, orange and green zones, or infections, the level of incidence of infection will determine which market you have to really serve and which market you have to serve faster. And I think this is one time where cost to serve has to be kept aside, and these markets have to be served to retain your market share and market leadership. And hence, most companies have looked at sensing demand. In fact, a common sense principle of DDMRP, which is actually not DDMRP, I beg to differ from Abe and everybody, is that it's more of an understanding where the demand comes from and servicing it at any cost. Going from here onwards, I think one question that really haunts me is that the past histories may not really be of useful in the near and the short run. As Ramandeep clearly stated, that sometimes later, obviously, when we are back to normal, time series will help, and the nature of his business and product mix has not changed. But in this 50, 60 days, or more than 60 days now, we have gathered certain data about this pandemic and the way the pandemic has been growing and dynamically moving forward. And we also have seen, if I localize to India for discussion's sake, that the pandemic has created a different impact, and we still are under pandemic pressures. How are we going to use this data? Is this data useful as a tool to plan our short run and the mid run? Not the near, but the short run and the mid term. So I'll start now with Manoranjan.
Yes, so data recently collected is something which beneficial on a short term. So we are rather missing out on the details. So we are rather minimizing the details on a forecast of the number of the business plans that we are submitting on the overall demand plan, so that we don't need to get down on the SKUs and clients or geography or demography labels that we should put in. But on a mid-term and long-term perspective, I believe once, because the momentum is still yet to be seen in the economy, which is expected in Q2 or Q3. So once the momentum is on, so once we see the complete cycle, how exactly the industry is behaving and how exactly the things are moving forward, and as an angle, there is no second wave to it, and there is no further lockdowns in place, and how exactly the global disruption and global growth is happening. Because we are not only, it's a matter of only Indian subcontinent business scenarios we are discussing, rather we are discussing on a global platform. So also, as we know, that there are certain elements wherein the exports of the contribution which is coming out of exports is also being impacted, right? So all these factors are interconnected. So I believe that on a mid-term and in a long term, things are definitely going to be seen in a different perspective once the entire visibility of how things are needed to be seen is being gathered from different sources. So it's very primitive at this point of time to comment and assess the impact and to take actions, complete actions on it. So we should rather wait for some more time to devise our action plans and take our plans accordingly.
Abe, what's your take on this? Because you all have been very active and you have a very good data for the last 2 months.
Yeah. If you ask me, I honestly believe that the data for the last 6 weeks at least is a treasure trove, especially for like us. Why I say that? Because food habits are not common across the country, and they change dramatically, right? Now, if you have to cater to the diverse needs of food using, in a sense, a very limited assortment, you need to be very clear about how habits and trends are changing. And there's nothing which has changed trend like this particular event. And this just shows you the power of what a significant change event can have on business. And hence, I believe that what we are seeing in the last 6 weeks or 60 odd days is indicative of what all can happen positively, as well as from a sense in terms of what all can go wrong. From a very long-term perspective, I think it is defining in terms of what opportunities the businesses can leverage or get ready for. Okay, I think a lot of us have spoken about out of home moving to in home. Now that's not going to happen now. That's going to stay for some time to come, right? So if out of home is going to come in home, what is it that the consumers want? Is your packaging going to remain the same as what you were giving yesterday, or does the packaging need to change? Second, what's the convenience factor that you're going to now put onto your product? Do you need to enhance the convenience factor because more people will be at home, which leads to more cooking occasions, which leads to more cleaning occasions, right? So how do you straddle that over the long term? I think is a very, very critical one. Second, we know that all product innovations take time. They don't happen overnight, right? So this is now possibly giving you, again, I'm going back to the two sectors which Mohit speaks very frequently about, right? He says education and health are here to stay. Everything else will possibly take a beating in the short term and the near term, right? Almost all of us would have leveraged online learning, right? Online learning's going places. Similarly, health's going places. So how do we ride that? I think will determine how the businesses are set up, not just for now, but for some time in future. So that's important. And I think we can't discount that. So the paranoia cannot get the better of us, right? Now, what do you do in the short term? In the short term, I think all organizations are in the process of reevaluating plans. We have reacted by cutting unnecessary costs. We have kept costs to whatever works for us. We have leveraged what we have. Now we need to next move on and see, okay, which part of the spending needs to come back. So is it on category development? Is it on making sure that my manufacturing capacities are up to speed? Is it in terms of vendor development or partnerships? Because partnerships have held a lot of organizations while others have lost, right? So where do I invest in the short term is the second one. And I think third one, from the complete demand planner's perspective, I see a very significant change which is going to come in, which is just the attitude of possibly balancing demand and supply is where the demand planners work or the planners work ends, will go into a dramatic change. Because now you need to get the commercial teams in, you need to get the financial teams in, and you need the supply chain team in. It is going to be collaborative. If you're going to work in a silo, you will not get it right because you don't have all the answers. No technology solution has the answers, and they will learn over a period of time. So I agree with Kumar. Short-term trends don't show up in any of your forecasting techniques. That is where you have to step out of your silos, go to your neighboring workstation and have that conversation to figure out what's happening. Nielsen becomes important, critically important. I think we will all be pushed out of our comfort zones, and people who are comfortable stepping out of those zones are the ones who will really make a material difference.
Thank you, Abhay. Raman, that's an interesting take from Abhay, saying that data of the past may not be really that important in the future, but he also makes it very simple to say that, oh, there are certain trends like the emergence of omni-channel in the e-commerce framework that's going to redefine India, and the share of omni-channels and e-commerce is going to be more, and hence we have to be planning it a little differently, and forecasting omni-channels is going to be another challenge. In terms of your business, what do you foresee as the role of this data, which I think you have a view on this, and forecasting from here on to next 2 quarters?
Yeah, Dr. Singh, I agree that data, what we are capturing right now, is going to be gold mine for us. And why I'm saying this is because as of now, no one can tell with certainty till the time we have some vaccination in place. No one can tell with certainty how this situation is going to evolve. You never know. We might have waves of again the COVID cases coming up, and there might be extended lockdowns, which again would be coming up. As the lockdowns are easing up, we are already seeing the pressure, the initial surge, which was around 500 patients when we started a lockdown. Then it took almost 61 days to grow from 500 to 1 lakh, and then it took only 7 days to cross 60,000 further. So this data point will be very, very important. If there is some resurgence of the cases due to which there might again be a lockdown, clamp down on probably it will not be pan India, but it will be in few pockets classified as red zones or yellow zones. In that fashion, it will help us determine what the customer behavior would be in immediate crisis situation. So that would tell us that what is the requirement of the customer, which is for immediate consumption. So for short term, again, for long term, I don't think this data will be relevant, but this will give us good insights on how what is the human psyche for that particular business, how the consumer is going to behave when he hears a word lockdown. What are the essentials he need to stock up? How much is he stocking up? How is it related to the consumption pattern? And so that is a storyline which will give us an indication that how this will look going forward. But again, if you ask me how we are going to plan, say 4 to 6 weeks from now, again, we are shunning the stat model as of now. It is purely on a weekly SNOE meetings, what we are doing with the business, just to understand, just to evaluate that the signals what we are getting from the market makes sense to everyone. We all need to be on same page so that we are able to take more conclusive actions. And that's how we are progressing. Obviously, we are facing few challenges because with this lockdown is hampering your supply capabilities. So if you're already operating at only 30%, you obviously cannot cater if there's some resurgence in demand which is going to come up. So there would be some demand loss, which again needs to be captured clearly, because whatever demand is coming from the market is totally a pull demand, which is an immediate requirement of the consumer right now. And it is very important that we document whatever we are losing right now and how we need to address that going forward. Will it come back to us, or that demand needs to be treated as demand loss? So those are few of the indices what we are taking from the current data points. But again, there's not, for immediate future, we're not seeing much value coming from the COVID situation, how the channel is behaving right now. And then I also agree that what is happening right now is that channels are operating in a very limited fashion. Our traditional channels are not even operating. We're not even having a POS data right now. What actions do you expect to take from it? So and there are few new channels for which you're not supposed to collect data points, and you're not having the visibility on the consumption itself. So it will take some time for the organizations and for the supply chain to evolve and to react how things are moving towards more of a consumption pattern, local consumption pattern, rather than building inventories or stocking up, considering a seasonality pattern and things like that. So for our business right now, our assumption is that the demand shall come back somewhere around Q3. Till then, it would be in a range of -20, -25.
What is your Q3? You can tell the audience, because your Q3 may be different.
Yeah, so I'm referring to Indian Q3 right now. It will be from October till December. That's a period where we anticipate that demand should start coming back with all the indices we are getting from different sources, different consultants.
All right, thank you, Raman. Kumar, can you tell us about the impact of this pandemic on demand and aggregate demand across the globe? You have seen that while China comes back, there is a major constraint to even China's balancing demand and supply, because demand across the world has taken a beat. If you look at a lot of this macroeconomic predictions from different organizations, there is a downward trend, and everybody is spelling doom for the economies. Without demand being there, and demand is no enigma, it has to be there for the businesses to really look at it. How do you understand this, and how do you use this in your planning process?
Sure. So, yeah, I think what you just mentioned is very true. Demand has taken a beating, specifically in some areas. For some areas or items, we have seen a spike in demand, but majority of, I would say, items that are not very core essential items could have taken a beating. Now, from a planning perspective, the impact of this is that we already discussed that it's very difficult to say that what the demand will look like a few weeks from now. And the key here is, how do you actually sense demand optimally, right? And demand sensing generally, which is a kind of a more structured process, needs to take a back seat in this scenario. And as I mentioned earlier, the process needs to be more manual, but the devil is in the details, I guess. Like when I say more manual, what it should be. I think it should be driven more by collaboration, like Abhay was mentioning, and this is where functions like sales and operations planning or integrated business planning need to step in and take a broader role. Now, one key thing that I see in this whole scenario is that I think there needs to be a much tighter collaboration between functions like supply chain and marketing. And the reason I say that is marketing teams generally in many organizations, they do their own analytics. And some of the analytics that they do, when I think about it, like sentiment analysis, becomes more important as you can actually pick as economies and regions and different geographies recover. You can actually pick chats and noise from say social media to understand and develops sentiment analytics models to understand how that demand will shape in like 4 weeks or 6 weeks from now. So that I think is the only way you can actually put some more data and analytics around demand sensing in the short term at this point. And based on what you see and based on the short-term demand data that is trickling from all your different geographies, you can actually put a better handle around what things will look like, say, 4 weeks from now or 6 weeks from now.
Thank you, Kumar. Manoranjan, what's your take on this? Because you come from a business which would be affected very badly by all economic decisions and even the macroeconomic development. And I think the way you are a global player, exports matter to you. How are you planning to understand the process of demand in the next 6 months or 8 months or a year? And what are your ways of using these data to understand and plan yourself better? I'm talking about the macroeconomic and the global GDP projections.
When it comes to the data which are collected, as Abhay said some time back, it also brought a lot of opportunities to us. Example, when it comes to factory automation equipment, so these days, one of the need of the hour is to automate and digitize the manufacturing in order to become more agile and to become more responsive to the demands or the orders that they receive. So if at all we had the lead times of X time earlier, so whether we are in a condition to deliver this in X-1 time frame or not. So we do have a solutions which is more of an industry 4.0 and e-factory, wherein it is the amalgamation of IoT and AI and machine learning and hardwares and softwares, wherein it helps to diagnose and help you to have a efficiency production manufacturing systems in place. So that is one good opportunity that is being given to us, the current data systems. And also at the same time, we have macroly and minutely observing the progress. Example, all those developments across various regions and the change in the consumer patterns. Example, recently there is a need for every consumer to become self-dependent. So a small example to understand, recently Honda and Hero has sold more than 10,000 bikes. So that to just make sure that, because recently in every companies, whosoever is any employee is following a public transport, they have been invariably communicated not to come to office. So what you're trying to say is that whosoever is following a public transport, please don't come to office, and if at all you have your own conveyance, please come over. So now there is a need for everyone to become self-dependent so far as transport methodology is concerned. Similarly, for every systems, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's communications, so things and systems are becoming more adaptive in nature. So we are trying to build solutions which is going to make systems and humans and society more dependent or more autonomous, so that they can respond to the need of the problems which they are going to face. So that is what is helping, giving the basic input in order to supply and in order to collaborate the informations and to act for the suppliers accordingly.
All right, but I think what about GDP 2021 forecast planning for your various segments? Because I was looking at your segments and it really is more of a global macroeconomy responsive segments rather than just the pandemic. And just building resilience in an organization without understanding the global development of the economy and the demand patterns may not be a very useful exercise.
Yeah, so Dr. Singh, in fact, going by a lot of experts' reports in place, we are seeing CRISIL's report of -5% next year, fiscal 21. So, there are a lot of factors and assumptions which are already been taken into consideration. So, the assumptions of further not having any lockdowns in place and not having any second waves. And in fact, there are a lot of assumptions which are yet to be factored into the FY21 business continuity plan. Example, how exactly it's going to affect the initial, as of now, the economic package, how exactly it's going to be implemented and how exactly it's going to benefit the entire industries. That is yet to come. People are yet to see. So we are also waiting the next Q3, as Raman said. So Q3 is the time frame wherein we are realistically have some figure and number which will add some sense to it. So wherein a lot of MSMEs output and the input and output could help us in order to build the robust demand planning systems. So though we have GDP, suppose example, if in case industry growth rate is around 25% of manufacturing, then we take certain percentage out of it, that how exactly what is the growth rate that we need to have in place. Reason being, we are predominantly a B2B player. So that is one assumption which can be factored in the business planning. And also example, if in case the GDP is around 5.5% or there is a growth rate of 6%, so we take one of the assumption is that the section, one of the product line which is related to OEMs and manufacturing can be doubled, at least that we are planning to have vis-a-vis the growth rate of manufacturing or OEMs versus the GDP growth rate, we take a base out of it. So since the systems are becoming more manual, there is no statistics and there is no scientific approach into it. We need to come back with the alternative approach. How exactly we can add some value into it, which can give some tentative results.
How are you looking at the business infrastructure sector? Because none of them, this will really jump up and start doing well given the economic situation, because the growth rate is 1.9 or less than 1.9 for India. So how are you preparing for the business infrastructure sector, like the metros and all where you serve?
In fact, so far as infrastructure projects are concerned, it has been planned on a longer horizon for 6 months to 2 years or 3 years. So though at this point of time, people are having a different perspective of having or not opting for a long haulage transport for 24 hours or 36 hours, 72 hours, which may be affecting down the line after 2 years if that is being continued and if at all there is no vaccination in place. But as of now, since it was meant on a, it was prepared and planned on a longer horizon 2 or 3 years back, so infrastructure projects are going well. So far as the metro and locomotive and traction projects across India, so it is going well because it is all done some 2 or 3 months, 3 years in advance. So that has happened already in the past. So there is not much impact. The only thing is the tendering process, which has happened in a documented format, it is getting converted into an online format of central processes, which is their systems are taking some time. So which is in fact been known that it will be moving to a quarters delay, 3 or 4 months delay in terms of delivery. So otherwise, infrastructure projects across India is going as planned earlier. So that impact we may see down the line 1.5 years or 2 years later, provided the vaccination is not being released. Yeah.
All right. I think before going into a few more questions, I'll go back to Ramandeep. Ramandeep, you made a very interesting statement in the beginning, and you have been defying those statements. You said your product mix has not changed, not much will change in the long run. Now, what do you mean by not much will change in the long run? How would forecasting be done if there is no, relapse of the pandemic or relapse of the virus? how are you going to really look at it? Because everyone, all of us are really looking granular and nearby short run. But you say the long run will start from October and suddenly. So will all this planning, which we have been doing for years together, in terms of assumptions that we make, models that we make, and the pandemic characteristic that we have, how does it change?
Yeah, fair point, Dr. Singh. So when I say long term for us, the year 2021 starts from October onwards. And how we are looking at the situation, obviously we're very closely monitoring regulatory and different government indices. And every month the new figure comes and it is again down by 0.5 or 1% from the earlier figure. So how the industry is evolving and what the signals what we are getting is that mobility is not going to go away anytime soon. And there is going to be an increased pressure on public transportation that will indirectly lead to people buying more used cars or at least the entry-level vehicles, specifically on the MCO, which is motorcycle bikes, and on the entry-level cars. So that segment is going to grow. And then an uptick is expected specifically around Diwali. That's what the indices what we are getting. But again, there are other assumptions which we need to make, and as the crisis is evolving, we are seeing some other information which is flowing to us. Like for example, Philippines has recently levied a 10% excise duty on all the imports which would be coming to the country, and that is being driven because most of the governments are falling short of the budget. So these things will definitely have an impact. How they are going to penalize whatever is being imported and then support as India is also doing and support local manufacturing of goods. So definitely there would be some impact, but as of now we believe that there is a net positive on the entry level mobility, and things should, again, assumption here is that there will be no relapse or there will be no further waves of COVID, which will again lead to severe lockdowns happening. There should be some resurgence coming from October onwards, and the base for that cannot be 2020. Definitely, that needs to go back to 2019, which was a more cleaner data for us because the clientele and the customer base for us remains same, and the product portfolio does not change for us. When I say the product portfolio does not change much is because the products we are into, lubricants and coolants, are being prescribed by an OEM. So when a vehicle goes to a service shop, they are sort of indirectly they have to match the OEM defined grade of oil. The consumer really doesn't have an option to use a different kind of oil. They can obviously use a competitor oil, but the grade which is mentioned is more of a commodity. The grade which is mentioned by the OEM, that needs to be consumed. So if I look at my history of 2019 and I high level, I'll not go at pack level. I look at a high level at my grade of say 10W40 or 15W40 grade oil, how the consumption was in the year 2019. And obviously we're splitting that at different segments and different categories of automobiles, because logistics is one sector, the trucking is one sector which is going to rebound from Q3 and Q4 onwards. Right now it's declining only because of the lockdowns and the paucity of the drivers, due to which almost 40 to 50% of the capacity of truck is standing across the roads. But once we have drivers available, there is going to be movement happening on the roads. There is going to be demand coming up for servicing of the vehicles, and that will be in line of the product mix what we have been selling in 2019. 2020, obviously there's been a lot of disruptions. We have been degrowing to the tune of -30 to -40%. That is clearly not a base for us to follow for 2021. Hence, what we are going to do is, for long term right now, we would be utilizing 2019 data, take our assumptions are going to change basis what sector is going to grow, what sector is going to decline, and make those amendments and are planning for 2021 with a modest growth of 2 to 3% as of now.
Thank you, Raman, for such a good insight into the base year, because there are a lot of speculation that all industry have to change their assumptions and the base year. which essentially may not look like this. Abhay,
Yeah.
one question comes to my mind listening to Ramandeep and also to Niranjan, that is this going to be an aberration here where you can say that, okay, this is what it was, all the data is useless and let's go back to the normal, historical databases with some learning from the pandemic. So what are your concluding thought on this? Quickly, we have less time now. Your mic is not on.
Yeah, thank you so much. So on a lighter note, I do wish that the KPIs are considered as an aberration and my team doesn't suffer. On a more serious note, I think for businesses which will be stressed. So I don't think it's a general one blanket covers all. For businesses like Ramandeep's, where you may take a 30% or a 20% decline over the year, prudence would demand to treat it as an aberration, right? While for businesses which may not take a hit like that and would still be on their average run rates growth, and some of them will be, right? Not everybody will be negatives. For them, it may not be an aberration, so to say. So a very simple answer, I don't think one size will fit all. Every organization will take a call on basis how the business performs. Some months will. So I definitely do think, especially for our business, I think in April and May would be treated as an aberration, and possibly we'll have to re-navigate to a 2019 April, May. I don't see right now whether the full year will be treated as an aberration though. I think that's where I currently stand.
I think that's very fair, and that's the way to look at it. It's very industry specific. Kumar, what is your view on forecasting in future? And as I said, AI ML based forecasting. I think everybody is talking about the new generation planning tools, planning solutions. So what are your thoughts about it, dealing with all the problems that we discussed today? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, so one thing that I want to state even before I get into the application of ML in forecasting is in events like these, even the best of machine learning and AI tools, if you already had one, would need some manual intervention. And that's the realistic state of AI and ML at this point. Having said that, I think AI and ML could have definitely helped if companies already had them, and there were companies in my knowledge based here in the US that were using an enterprise AI solution that were able to actually sense some of the demand anomalies, I would say, well in advance, and that actually helped them restructure their manufacturing strategy. They got inventory. They bought inventory, placed it closer to some of their key manufacturing locations to kind of prepare well in advance for this pandemic. So I believe compared to traditional forecasting methods, and when I say traditional, it's I would say more like time series forecasting methods. I believe AI and ML based algorithms do have advantage. And just to add to that, the definition of AI and ML is very broad. Generally in the world of business, but when I say AI and ML, it's more advanced multiple regression or like more advanced prediction methodologies like random forest. And there are multiple advantages to that, right? There are advantages in terms of how you manage your model, as in obviously with these kind of models, you have accelerated data processing speed. You can basically create a more automated system, which is more adaptable to change. So that's in terms of the automation and execution part. In terms of the logic, I believe I was talking about sentiment analysis earlier, right? As an example. Now imagine having an ML tool that actually extracts its inputs, leveraging unstructured text extracted from various social media sites. It extracts those inputs from the social media sites and does this customer sentiment analysis and incorporates that as an input in its demand forecasting. Right? It can self-learn and self-teach itself. So these are very much possible actually, even with today's algorithms, but they do require kind of a very meticulous planning, I will say, and good execution in order to have a forecasting, a machine learning or AI-based forecasting tool that would actually help you not only in normal operations, but in disruptive events or severely disruptive events like this one.
Thank you, Kumar. I think we will have to move to question and answer session because we have come to end of the discussion part. There's a very interesting question, and I think it can be first left to any panelists who would like to react to this. How are FMCGs managing demand sensing in rural India, which would now witness a return of lot of migrants and probable consumers? India is a very different economy where large amount of your demand resides in the rural areas. And I think how are you going to really assess demand with the return of migrant, both in terms of he has affected supply and transport and now also demand. So Abhay, would you like to take it to start with?
Yeah. Yes, I'll give it a shot. I may not be the authority on this because we don't have a very large rural business, but for whatever little that we have, I think my approach would be like this. You have specific channels in the country which cater to rural, especially for us. If I talk about us, we have a super stockist sub-dealer network, right? We know that migrant populations come from what part of the country or what part of country contributes to a large population of migrant laborers. We are preempting some of it. We are preempting some of it by strengthening our network downstream because we believe that there will be influx of population back to those states and they will consume some. We are relooking at our value proposition very, very clearly in terms of with depression in terms of income, what will be the currency of exchange? Will the price point change specifically? Do we need to look at lower price points in terms of being available there? Or is that your first place of availability? Do you want to maximize your availability at a sub 100 price point first rather than explode further? So those are balanced business decisions and risks that we'll have to take. But that trend is clearly visible. We know that certain states, geographies are going to be the ones which will lead it. We may take a staggered approach to see how it responds there before we go far and out wide. So it may be prudent to take a staggered. Will change if I was in Dabur, so to say, on organizations which are very, very highly penetrated in rural.
Ramandeep, let me change the goalpost from rural to agro. And would you like to take the same question? Because that also becomes very important in terms of your business. And agro becomes a very critical part of your business.
Yeah, Dr. Singh, for us, we've been monitoring the agriculture sector, and for the harvest of March, I would like to say that India has had a record harvest. So overall, the sector is looking optimistic. But again, because of this COVID situation, the spending right now is not as desired. But the indices state that Diwali is a time when people will come back as buyers, and specifically for us, it is the tractor and other machinery, agriculture machinery, for which the purchase is going to go up. So as of now, rural sector and the agriculture sector looks more optimistic than the other sectors which are being impacted because of COVID.
Let me add a few things to this. If you see the migration of the migrant, also the stimulus to the farmers, and some form of stimulus which is non-politically politics aberrated from this, would show that there is a lot of return of migrants which is going to be longer than expected, from 6 months to 2 years. This is how it is going to happen with Manrega having started in some states. I think rural demand will be very different for FMCGs, and for the basic FMCGs it will be very robust. And it is already robust. If you look at Dabur, if you look at Godrej, I think they have seen not much disruption. Even most rural areas still are orange or largely green zones. That means they are more, open to business and amenable to business. And I think the super stockist model, if you look at this, is working very fine in India. So I think India's rural market will do well with the good buying of the crop now. and Diwali as a major sentiment, I think it will be a robust demand in the rural market as far as it is concerned. The second question is from Nikhil Joshi. If planning will be done more near term, will the boundaries between forecasting, rough capacity planning and finite capacity scheduling blur? Will short-term planning scheduling drive manufacturing collaboration? Kumar, can you take this? Did you get the question?
Yes, I think I got the question.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I got the question. And actually, I think we need to understand that these are like two separate things when we talk about rough cut capacity planning and the other elements. They are more specific to manufacturing planning, manufacturing execution planning, right? Which has in most instances been kind of short to mid-term always. And right now, on the other hand, we are talking about demand planning, which used to be mid and long-term and short-term. Now we want to focus it within a short term. So I really don't think that it's going to make any major changes in the way rough cut capacity planning used to happen. But I think the challenge comes from the fact, I think the question comes out of the fact that now you are planning in the short term. How do you translate that short term planning quickly into manufacturing planning? Because manufacturing planning systems needed kind of a, I would say, a buffer zone and a bandwidth to incorporate the planning and plan in advance. So that is going to be tricky, and I think some ways companies are kind of trying to focus on that. As one strategy that Abhay was mentioning is focusing on some of the top products, and that is not only happening in terms of planning, but actually for some companies they have actually stopped production of some of the long tail of their SKUs and focusing on some of the top high velocity products. So what that allows these companies to do is that when they predict in the short term demand plan, it allows them to quickly capture that in their manufacturing planning, in their manufacturing planning systems as well quickly, so that there is minimum lag between manufacturing planning and demand planning. So there is going to be interactions obviously between these two, and there is definitely going to be an impact because of the changing nature of the demand planning into short term on manufacturing planning, the way manufacturing is planned. But it's not going to change the structure of way manufacturing planning has always happened in companies.
Thank you, Kumar. Thank you, Kumar. There's a question from Abhijit Joshi. Considering this pandemic, how is the lead time factor being considered in the planning and forecasting? What is the approach for safety stock? How is the impact of stockout being planned? Example, due to lockdown, stockouts at local stores might be seen as demand drop and might see a surge when some transport is resumed. I think if Abhay can really look at this, this is something that I have seen as far as the Kellogg products are concerned. I told you last night also.
Yeah, Dr. Singh, again, I think our approach is currently to break it into pieces. We don't have, I think there is a bandwidth challenge in terms of being able to tackle all of it together. We are starting from our perspective of partners first, where you have clear and direct line of sight. We have a very good estimate of what's a good stock level in terms of days of stock cover, or in terms of the assortment that a channel partner should carry or would carry, depending on what geography they are in. The first point of attack, or what is our priority number one, is to build that back. To build that back, I need to build stock back at my warehouses or my depots. So that's how we are tracing it. The first intent is to build back stock covers in my mother warehouses and my downstream CFAs. Look at how my partners are and where are they getting to basis versus pre-COVID, right? On stores, retail stores have very little information which comes back through POS, right? The second thing that has happened during this pandemic is a lot of retail sale has turned into counter sales. What do I mean by that is partners are selling off the counter, right, to large retail stores. So you may not have pristine retail store demand, which may come in through either your ERP or your DMS system. So we'll have to discount that for a fact, and hence prioritize whatever is robust and clearly line of sight. I think warehouses at our own as well as partners is very, very robust in terms of line of sight and robustness of data. That's the first point of attack. The second point of attack is modern trade accounts, because their POS data as stores start opening up, and even if you discount offtake data for the last month, right? I think POS data is very, very powerful for small format stores, because the hyper format stores have still not come back. Small format stores are surrogate neighborhood stores, right? They are very good surrogates for how your mom and pop stores would behave. Their assortments are also very similar to what a mom and pop store would carry. I think those are the two reference points that we can use, and that is what is available right now in terms of guiding you make an informed decision. Again, I'll be honest, I don't think there is current bandwidth to manage all parts of the equation. The parts of the equation which are clear are the ones that we need to manage.
All right, thank you. I think there's too many questions to Abhay, so I'll skip them now. Those will be answered offline. In case of demand sensing, how would companies ensure service level and stockouts, considering that JIT would be not work on sourcing ends? Manoranjan, would you like to take that?
Surely.
Demand.
Could you just please come again? I'm not being able to hear you. Yeah.
In case of demand sensing, how would companies ensure service level and stockouts, considering that JIT would not work on sourcing end, on the supply end? Or anybody from the panel who can take it. This is the last question that we can take it.
So when it comes to in fact, we really had the same instances in our ends wherein the JIT at the supply ends has encountered such issues. So in order to handle that crisis, in fact, we have brought in a lot of visibility into various legs of supplies. So starting from the supply ends, whether it's vendor and our OEM or our own manufacturers, to various legs of transit. So earlier, in fact, to drive that visibility and transparency across various legs, it was a kind of challenge, but having this pandemic in place, a lot of visibility and transparency has brought in into various legs. So that invariably has given that advantages in order to drive and to expedite that movement and to plan a alternative if in case we are not being able to make it to the as per the deadlines and timelines. So that is one thing which has recently happened post pandemic, and this is what in fact we are bringing in a lot of IT enablement so that further stockouts and such invisibility, if at all there is any systems in the entire value chain, can be evaporated or can be disabled. Yeah.
Very good. There's a question from Viswanathan Rajamanikam. Pandemic has shown the issue of data visibility across value chain. How do you see the technology evolving for data visibility? So I think, Raman, do you want to take that?
Sure, Dr.
Singh. I think we can have a small view of everyone, because this is what has been propagated throughout. And then again, this has been a very strong way of saying that visibility is what matters. And even Manoranjan did talk about lakes and so mapping the sourcing destination, tier 1 to the last tier, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Raman?
I think in current times, there are two words. One is obviously visibility, as you mentioned, and second is the collaboration. Collaboration both with your suppliers and with your customers is very important right now, because you are in a situation where you're not able to deliver 100% of the products which are being asked by the consumer. So you need to evaluate that what is the need of the hour, which is what is the requirement which is for immediate consumption, and you need to be I would say you need to be very open both with your suppliers as well as with your consumers what you can service. Let me give you an example. Like in our case, our plant in Mumbai is operating only at 30% of the capacity. So obviously we can't service all the orders which are coming up to us. And this is where the supply chain resilience parts come into play. We are trying to evaluate how quickly we can react to the demand signals which are coming from the market. And basis that, we are evaluating what all sourcing options we are having within the region, because we obviously can't look for because this is a very short-term impact. We really can't source material from Singapore because the port is completely congested in case of India, and then we are struggling with inventories moving from Mumbai to other regions for almost 2 months now. So how we are addressing this is we are trying to build local capacities in collaboration with few of the tollers what we used to do business with, and we're trying to build specific inventories for the fast mover grades. Again, it is, I would say, 20% of the grades which are generating the maximum revenue for us. And then we are providing a visibility to both the customer as well as to the supplier how things are planning, and that's where the SNOP or SNOE, whatever you call, plays a very important part. And this is where we sort of collaborate. We address what the demand is on hand and how much of that can be catered to within a limited time period of 3 to 4 weeks. And then again, in these uncertain times, there's no way that we would be able to meet the customer service levels. There is bound, because a lot of discrepancies, a lot of uncertainties in the market, specifically on the logistics side right now, what we are facing with all the migrant labor moving back to the rural hometowns. There's a dearth of truck drivers, which is impacting the operations, and that's where the maximum impact of the customer service level is being felt right now in the industry. We're still able to being resilient. We're still able to address the supply piece, but the logistics piece is a piece which will take some time to come back to the normal track.
All right. Thank you, Ramdeep. Kumar, you have a stake on this?
Yeah, sure. So addressing that question of visibility, I mean, obviously, visibility has become critical, has come across and been highlighted as a critical aspect. In my mind, it's not something that is a new capability that needs to be built or like something new that organizations have realized at this point. It has always been a fact that visibility is one of the most important criteria to have in supply chain. This is an unfortunate event, but hopefully this will again kind of accelerate the pace of digital transformation in organizations. When I say that, specifically in terms of investing in visibility tools if they already don't have it. And in some cases, based on my experience, I've seen that organizations do have some tools which are not being leveraged to their full potential. So I think this is a great opportunity to highlight that, to either use the tools that they have in a prudent way or invest in supply chain visibility tools. Leverage this pandemic to kind of make a business case for having end-to-end supply chain visibility in the organization.
Thank you. One more question as we have 2-3 minutes left. What is the role of scenario planning and forecasting today? You know, the long-term forecasting, and how do we move with scenarios? Because I saw almost all of you building scenarios, but none of you talked about scenarios in that sense of the term. The near term, the short term, and the long term were the scenarios, I believe. And you also build up the best, the worst, and not so best, not so worst case, the 3 scenarios that I saw. So does organization use scenario planning in terms of building as a framework for long-term forecast and short-term building the long-term even during such uncertain times and become more resilient? Anyone? I'm just keeping it open to anyone to start with.
Yeah, I can provide. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Kumar, please go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
We being a Japanese company, we are having a 3 years planning horizon so far as the business plans are concerned. So as I said earlier, in fact, till yesterday, we are having discussions how to submit the business continuity plan or to revise budgets for FY 2021 and 22. So so there are earlier you might have remembered during GST we have created 3 simulations. If at all GST is implemented 1st April, 1st July, or 1st September. So similarly, in a we have been creating 2 scenarios here. One is for a short, medium term, and long term, and also at the same time the worst, bad, and good scenarios. So if at all the industry behaves well, so considering all the factors, good factors in place, we are also creating that how optimizing if in case everything is moves the way it is planned, and there is a vaccination in place. So what would be the scenario? So we are also planning for a good, bad and worse, as well as on a short, medium and long term. So the only thing is the details are missing in the business plan. So if in case we expect some kind of accuracy and relevance and sense to the business plan at this point of time, when it is being submitted in the revised budget plan in between May to July for FY 20 or 21 and 22, it may be missing at this point of time. But once we move forward towards Q3 and towards the end of Q3 or Q4, I guess we can add some value to it. So far as the planning horizons and the short-term, medium-term, and long-term planning are concerned. Thank you.
Dr. Rakesh, we can't
Mr. Singh,
hear you or see.
Mr. Singh, yeah.
I think Dr. Singh is facing some,
Can you hear me? Ajay?
again, technology issue.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Dr. Singh. Yeah, we can.
Okay. All right, Kumar, you can go ahead, please. Sorry, I think I lost myself here.
Okay. No, I think what I was going to say was very in line with what Manoranjan just mentioned. But I was going to say it in a generic way that scenario planning has already been a key part of demand planning. In normal circumstances, it's more, I would say, standardized and kind of automated, as in the long term, you would assume, for example, that your demand in certain markets would increase by X% or decrease by X%. It has taken a whole new meaning in the wake of this pandemic, where you still have scenarios, but they are very customized, and you have to essentially manually define parameters and run those scenarios kind of more manually as compared to the more automated predefined scenario runs that you would actually do in your demand planning in normal circumstances.
Thank you. Raman, if you have a take on this.
Yeah, Dr. Singh, I think scenario planning has always been an integral part of the SNOP, what we have, and as Kumar said and Manoranjan highlighted, we are having all the scenarios on being optimistic and being pessimistic with what assumptions we are getting or what signals we are getting from the market, and we are trying to find a midway, and again, this is an evolving situation and changing not on a monthly basis but on a daily basis, I would say. And then again, just to sum it, I would say there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. So it's a very, very dynamic situation. Whatever scenario planning we used to do were in sync with the business planning for a long-term basis. Right now we're doing on a weekly basis. And again, because of the supply continuity pressure also, we have to evaluate how the new sources we are identifying, how that will impact our cost of goods sold, how the cost pressure will come into play, how the margins will be impacted. So obviously there's a lot of work going around the scenarios which are sort of helping the management to arrive at better decisions.
Abhay, can you take it from an IBP perspective? The same question.
Again, I'll start on a lighter note. I just wish that the number of scenarios were fewer that we needed to manage and less frequently. I'm personally a bit overwhelmed when I get multiple asks on scenario planning, because at certain point of time it starts to add noise rather than value. Yeah, you just tend to get lost in the deluge of data and the type of scenarios that you've created. We need to anchor ourselves in terms of what's the current business priority, as well as in the short term what's the business priority. And any scenario that would deviate or take you on a path slightly different from what your priorities are, your significant scenarios. The challenge in a situation like this is everyone's got a hypothesis, right? And every hypothesis cannot be a scenario, right? So whatever's your true north on the business, every scenario that keeps you there or can destabilize you is a worthy scenario. I would take all of that in. That I don't think is very different from how we would have treated it earlier also, right? Those were the watch outs that all of us were keeping our business, trying to safeguard our business to the best of our abilities to. So we'll have to take the noise out of the fact and keep grounded to the fact. Don't get overwhelmed with the asks. Keep a clean head. Again, try to be as clear as you can be possibly, and then navigate. That's how we'll come through this. Some of us will be worse off, some will be better off, and collectively we learn. That's where I am. That's very personal approach that I would recommend, and that's what I try to do in terms of managing our business here.
Thank you, all of you, and I think it has been wonderful interacting with all of you. And thanks for giving a more precise answer to the question that have emerged. This is the second part of our town hall. In the third part, we will deal with scenario planning, we'll deal with connected planning and integrated business planning, and we'll dissect them and their feasibility, not only from the perspective of pandemic, but also post-pandemic. I think one take on scenario planning is more, trying to identify the sources of risk in the future rather than looking at normal scenarios of planning the demand. And I think the large number of companies like Cell, there's a very good article I was reading in the Harvard Business Review in a special issue right now, which clearly indicates that gives you a very long-term horizon of building your capabilities. And in terms of connected planning and IBP, I am not going to make any statement. I request all of you to come back for the last town hall, where you'll see some stalwarts who have practiced IBP for a number of years, some solution providers which are claiming to be providing the best connected planning solutions, and some consulting firm which look at scenario planning in a very different way during the pandemic. So we'll be concluding the town halls with these three basic concepts. I thank all of you for being here. I clearly see you all as the next generation supply chain leaders shaping the supply chain in this country, and wish you all the best. And I thank all the audience for being here today to listen to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Dr. Singh. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Girish, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, and thanks to Ramandeep, Manoranjan, Abhi, and Kumar Singh. That was a wonderful exposition of the future of what demand planning will be. There are a number of questions which have still come to us. For lack of time, we have not been able to address all of them. However, for the sake of people who would like to, we would now want to also invite you to please look at our knowledge portal, scmproknowledge.in. It will contain a lot of interesting articles for you, and we will also be putting up the video recording of this session. For those of you, I see some of you have requested that you have not been able to listen to some parts of it because of poor audio connection at your end. We will be sending you a link to the recorded version. Please do look at it, and please do keep coming back to the ISCM demand planning town hall series. We have one more to go. I thank you all for logging in. I thank also Team ISCM for doing this in such a nice and slick way. Thank you, Jaisal. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Yvonne, Pallavi, and Sanjay Gupta. Thank you very much. Look forward to the next version of it. Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Stay safe.